turn us over to Dr.
Accept.
Fawcett, you're on.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm going to start out with an apology to the group because I came on a red eye last night and with very little sleep, and I haven't had a chance to prepare any education today. So I'd love to do, like, if we can just go right into the Q&A. That'd give me a break for today.
We can absolutely do that. We've got a couple left from last week, so I'll start us off with these while everybody types their current questions into the Q&A. Anything about addiction, recovery, relationships, neurobiology related to any of that, chemsex addiction. Dr. Fawcett is the world's leading expert on chemsex addiction, which is the fusion of substance and sex behaviors, among other things that he is incredibly knowledgeable about. Okay, so this is from last week. This is a betrayed partner who is in incredibly intense pain. Discovery was over 3 years ago. What followed was 3 years in non-specialized marriage counseling, not knowing about CSAT, certified sex addiction therapists, not knowing about betrayal, trauma, gaslighting, etc. Everything flew out of control a couple of months ago, and I've been in the most intense pain and grief. The cheating husband is now in 12-step recovery, has a sponsor, a CSAT. The betrayed partner keeps hearing, of course, that he's not capable of being a safe space yet. This is for the betrayed partner. That said, I have to keep seeing him and letting him help me with our young children. And we are, or I am, trying to have some way to connect with him on this path because I just can't handle the shock and pain of all this, of having a husband who doesn't seem to have a desire to comfort me when I hurt so badly. He keeps making promises and then providing me with a little bit of hope. And then the next time I get angry and he disappears, he emotionally abandons me, doesn't come back when he knows I'm in pain. And I have an entirely new trauma every time I'm abandoned in the intensity of this pain. And then this continues. Oh, it's one very long question. So part 2 of this is I'm looking at making a safety plan whereby if this trauma continues, I'm getting very, very worried about my health. I need to get far away with my child so I stop coming back to him for comfort. I have to break this cycle of coming back to him for repeated trauma and abuse. But now he is terrified, and it seems this plan will just cause him to live in fear and lie more. Any ideas? How can we break this cycle? This happens every 3 days or so.
Wow.
A lot into that.
Yeah, first of all, it's a long duration to be going through this kind of rhythm and this pattern of that kind of dishonesty and or game playing, at least I'll put it that way. So I think, I'm sorry, this is why we always try to get a CSAT, because people just don't understand the dynamics of this. And even well-meaning therapists will kind of give people poor advice, in my opinion, because it doesn't really fit the situation and they're not familiar with it. And in many cases, normal couples counseling kinds of directives don't really work so well when we're dealing with an active sex addiction or when in recovery and all the processes that are involved. So I'm glad there are some CSATs involved now. I wasn't sure that you have a CSAT yourself. I'm speaking this to the writer of the poser of the question, but these are really important people to have in your corner to have that specialized skill. I think in terms of a safety plan is the right idea. What we talk about always is boundaries and the need for boundaries here. And the key with boundaries is that they protect you. You put them out to protect yourself, but you have to be willing to follow through. And so I think it's well worth the effort to put some effort and consultation with somebody into creating a good set of healthy boundaries for yourself in terms of what you're going to do if. And I think that's the way to go. You mentioned your health, and that when I hear stuff like that, it really concerns me because I know how emotional stress can wear people down, and that starts to translate after a while into physical health issues. And so that's a serious thing. Plus, young kids, there's a lot of factors in the mix here. So I think to get some assistance, this is not something necessarily that you have to create or invent yourself. There's a lot of support out there, whether it's through your CSAT or peer support groups here on SRH and other places. So I would really start making a plan, get some input, find out what other people have done, find out what's reasonable, see what's realistic. And I definitely think start worth doing the plan. I have actually seen people sometimes when they go through the steps of beginning to make a plan or can follow through and finalize a plan, that in itself can be a catalyst that starts to help good changes happen. And so I think I'd really encourage you to start doing that and making a plan with that might include a date. You know, things have to change in this way by this time. I think all those steps are going to be important for you, but this is not sustainable. And frankly, when we have addiction around or half-hearted recovery, I'll put it that way. Sometimes I think that rhythm can go on for a long time, where people kind of couples drop into this dance, and where it kind of blaming and gaslighting, and then it blows up. There's a little discovery, and then there's hurt, and then it all starts to start again. So it sounds like you guys, unfortunately, are starting to enter into one of those patterns where you're bouncing along the bottom, and as you know, that's just emotionally unsustainable for you and him, I'm sure. So I would go ahead and get that consultation with a therapist and with other peers and see what you can do about setting boundaries. I think it's absolutely the right way to go.
Yeah, I want to kind of parse some things from this question. One of the things that's in this question, I keep hearing that he, meaning the cheater, is not capable of being a safe space yet, meaning a safe space for the betrayed partner. This is actually fairly normal in early recovery. Normally, if I'm in a relationship and I'm hurt and needing support, I would go to my spouse. But when my spouse is the one who has caused the pain, I can't really go to my spouse because my spouse isn't a safe space. David, do you find that? And what are the alternatives for a betrayed partner in this early part of healing, when, who clearly needs some empathy and support and can't get it from the cheater because the cheater caused it?
Yeah, and it's such a good point, Scott, because that's really the ultimate kind of offending kind of piece here, is that the person you normally go to help you and assist you is actually the one causing the harm. So I think in that case, that's where I was saying a therapist. So we need trusted people, right? And we all have, I think, friends in our lives who don't understand certain issues and might give us advice, just like a therapist that's not a CSAT might give advice that's not necessarily very helpful. I think having people who have some experience or some knowledge, at least, of these dynamics is really useful. And that can be a professional, it can be certainly peers. We have some groups here at Sex and Relationship Healing of betrayed partners that are really strong and facilitated. And so those are examples of places where you can get good information in terms of what to do and what to say. But I think, we have to start looking elsewhere. And that's a sad statement, but it's true. And that the person, if they're not quite safe, we need to find people who can hold that safety for us until we can do it for ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah. It says he doesn't seem to have a desire to comfort me when I hurt so badly. And I think this, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, David, too, but I think what we're dealing with is an addict in early recovery here. Addicts, we don't drink or get high or look at porn or chase prostitutes or go to the strip club to have fun. We don't. It's not about having a good time. It's about escaping strong emotions, because we just don't handle strong emotions very well. That's why we escape into porn or whatever it is we do. It's not about sexual arousal, it's about escape. And we use the intensity of pornography or strip clubs or whatever to create a dopamine and adrenaline rush that mirrors what we get with cocaine or alcohol, or in a lot of ways mirrors, and it gets us out of our head, so that we don't have to feel emotional pain. So he may be feeling terrible about what he's done, and I'm not making excuses here. I'm simply stating what I see as the truth. He may be feeling terrible about what he's done, but you're in so much pain that he can't handle it. It's not that he doesn't want to comfort you, it's that he literally is not capable of it at this point in his recovery. I spent 25 years not feeling. When I got sober, I still didn't want to feel. I just didn't have my coping mechanism anymore. I wasn't drinking, I wasn't using, I wasn't acting out sexually. And I had to sit with my feelings, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. I couldn't handle my own feelings, let alone yours. Oh my God. So and again, I'm not trying to make excuses. But I am saying it may not be that he doesn't want to comfort you. He may desperately want to comfort you and just not have the skill set or the ability to tolerate it right now. So David, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Scott. I think very often in recovery, it takes a period of time, and I'm talking months, to really have those that, I guess what a neurologist called the empathy circuitry, come back online. We have this capability of understanding and feeling what other people. Addiction, and sex addiction particularly, is devastating on that process. It just cuts that off. And so it's very common when we have guys in treatment to say, to acknowledge the things they've done and how hurtful it was, and how even intellectually how hurtful it must be, but they can't quite make that connection at a feeling level, and it's very difficult. The other thing that goes on sometimes, and with couples, of course, that's the closest person in our lives, and so often there's a whole history of dynamics there, and so very often we have couples who are reacting with an old kind of trauma response because their spouse. I've had one kind of, I'm not saying this is this case at all, but the one that comes to mind, a great example of that is a client I had recently whose father was a real rager yeller. And he would, as a kid, he would just like shut down when that happened to his dad. He just went kind of blank. And when his wife gets elevated and also raises her voice, he has the same reaction. And it's not by choice. He's not avoiding it. Just that's his kind of trauma, his own trauma response. And so I think that's why I really recommend both parties, both the addict and the betrayed partner, do their individual work in the beginning to kind of help to manage those responses, so you can start to talk to each other and stay present. We work a lot with our clients at learning how to stay emotionally present when every cell in our body is saying run the other way, right? And so how do I stay in this uncomfortable situation and follow through and be emotionally responsible? And it's hard. It takes some skill. So I agree with Scott, and I also agree that not to make excuses, but I think that ability to really, first of all, know what's happening, to feel it, and then to know what to do, because everything feels awkward. And so again, that's where I think some professional guidance could be helpful. But good for you for expressing your need, for feeling that you're not getting it, and I would encourage you to figure out how you can verbalize the need and put it out there and see how he might be able to respond in a way, and it may take some guidance and coaching on the part of his own CSAT. But I think those are the kind of steps that are absolutely possible for a couple, and they're essential to rebuild that trust and the communication, for sure.
Yeah. The next bit I want to pull out of this, he keeps making promises, providing me with a little bit of hope, and then doesn't keep them, and she's traumatized every single time this happens. Dr. Rob did a study a few years back, and one of the findings was it's the lies and secrets and not kept promises, unkept promises. Yeah, I knew there was a better way to say that. The lies, the secrets, and the unkept promises hurt usually the betrayed partner far more than the actual sexual behavior, far more than the actual cheating. It's the covering up and the promising to change and not doing it. That's the bigger, more painful betrayal. And every time this happens, particularly after initial discovery, if I keep acting out or I keep not keeping my promises, I mean, I know I'm hurting you now. It's almost like double for the betrayed partner, because before maybe I didn't realize how much I was hurting you, but now I know how much I'm hurting you, and it is more painful. David, can you address that whole ball of can of worms, Pandora's box, whatever we want to call it?
Yeah, I think when we're in our acting out phase, right before a lot of the recovery activities or efforts, we don't have the awareness. And I think we always talk about recovery kind of ruining your drinking, ruining your drugging, ruining your acting out, because once we understand how our addictions are functioning for us in terms of numbing and escaping feelings and filling time when we're bored and also the stuff that they do, giving us intensity and sensation and all that. Once we realize what's really going on there, it doesn't work so well. And even when we try to kind of drop in a fantasy to deal with some negative feeling or something, it's only half working because we know now the dynamic and what's going on. And I think in early recovery, sometimes people understand what they're doing. The addict, for example, may understand that he's hurting you. These reactions are continuing to trigger and be bad. And I think there's sometimes there's a learning curve, basically, that where people have these new skills that they have to create. And that a lot of that, believe it or not, a lot of the intimacy skills happen in seeking integrity and in the group. You know, a bunch of men sitting around in group who start to tell each other stuff they thought they would carry to the grave, or things that they've never told a single soul. And suddenly you have people learning how to trust one another and learning how to be vulnerable. And those are the building blocks that they need to take home to their marital partners and do the same thing. And but it's not like turning on a light switch. These things take time. And people and the couples, and I've been married a long time myself, you know, you fall into ruts, right? And you react, and instead of kind of approaching each situation with a fresh new eye, you know, I may have been through this argument 10 times before and I know where this is going. And so suddenly we drop into our old ruts instead of really dealing with it in a fresh new way. And so I think, again, all the guidance a couple can have is beneficial. And that means CSATs, it means a couples counselor at the right time, and it means strong support groups for both. Because only by having those other people kind of hold that space for us when we make mistakes with the best of intention. I remember kind of a client making his first call. We have a blackout period after, you know, for 3 days when guys come into seeking integrity, and the first call on a Thursday morning or Thursday evening was with his wife trying to say the right thing, and despite his best efforts, fumbling and just kind of further enraging his wife, who did so sometimes people are making the best effort and it's still not, it's just so awkward, it just doesn't work. So I think patience and some, I think benefit of the doubt attitude sometimes. I know that's hard for a partner after so many years and months of gaslighting sometimes, but I think just kind of hanging in there, because that process, and I think we can tell just with a gut check, right? If somebody is kind of playing games and gaslighting, or if they're really sincerely trying and just not very good at it yet. And so I think kind of trying to make that distinction too, and have everybody have a little bit of grace and not fall into the old patterns. And you know, any couple that's been together for a while, when they have those patterns of arguing like that, it's so easy to just drop back into it and assume the betrayal and assume the ill intent, and it's not always the case. So I think that, again, just perspective and support, I guess that's the key.
Yeah, there's Michelle Mays is a certified sex addiction therapist on the East Coast. She's in Virginia. She writes a blog for betrayed partners. It's called Partner Hope. You can find it at partnerhope.com. She writes about all kinds of stuff. If you're a betrayed partner, go onto her site, start reading her blog. It's brilliant. And one of the things she's talked about a number of times is this relationship ambivalence, where I love you and I want to stay with you, but you keep lying to me and it keeps hurting me. And, you know, it's this push-pull for betrayed partners. I love you, but I hate you at the same time. And, you know, it's, you know, some relationships are damaged too deeply to ever get over the pain. But most relationships, no matter how much damage was done, can survive and can actually come back stronger than ever. But there's always going to be this period of, should I stay? Should I go? Am I take the kids and run? You know, all of that stuff. It's a normal, fairly normal reaction. It's fairly common. So I don't want you to think you're out there all alone. Come to the Betrayed Partners groups, you know, on seeking or on sexandrelationshiphealing.com and get some support.
There's a lot of kind of anecdotal wisdom in 12-step recovery around this, right? No major decisions or changes like the first year. There's one we hear a lot. And I think there's a lot of wisdom packed into that sentence, because the choices that I make in early recovery at 3 months are going to be very different than what I make at 6 months, and very different than I make at a year, because we're in motion, especially that first year. So I think anything like ending a relationship should certainly be kind of at least slowed down, slow walked at least until you really see what's going on.
Yeah. I'm going to go a little out of order here, and I'm going to pull this out of the chat feature. My husband has Covenant Eyes, which is a protective, a filtering and monitoring software like NetNanny. So he can't watch this work group on his phone or his computer. I really want him to watch it. Any tips on how to go about that? Right now we're living separately, working on a relationship. He's in recovery and doing really well. I keep sending him things on this site to watch. He can listen to the podcast, but he can't watch the work groups. You can go into Covenant Eyes. I'm just going to answer this one for you, and change the settings. You can what we call whitelist a site. Like you can just go in and whitelist section relationshiphealing.com. Covenant Eyes will, on the basic setting, will block us because we have sex in the name of our company, and it thinks we're a porn site. So you can go in and whitelist sex and relationshiphealing.com. You can blacklist certain sites that don't sound like porn sites, but are. But you have to do that manually. So whoever has his password can go in and do that for him, and he should be able to then access this site, or he should be able to access us also on YouTube. And we do post the webinars on YouTube, so he might be able to get them through YouTube too. But he would have to subscribe to Sex and Relationship Healing, and it might get blocked. So again, might have to whitelist it. Okay, to the Q&A. My husband is a sex and porn addict with 8 months of recovery. He so badly wants to understand the why of everything, how he became an addict, what caused him to act out with other people. I feel like he focuses on the why so much that it keeps him from doing the real hard work in recovery, 12-step meetings, groups, etc. What would you tell him about how to put the why on hold for now and focus on changing behaviors and building new habits? I'm almost laughing because this is the first 8 months of my recovery. I wanted to know why, whose fault this is, when will they make amends? Yeah, David, all yours.
Yeah, I think this is a really classic question. I thank you so much for putting it out there, because this is something we encounter a whole lot. I think, and I don't know if it's how men are wired to think or not, but almost I can guarantee the first couple of discussions I have with any client when I first start is like, why is this happening? What's the solution? How can I fix it? But the fix often is in terms of like, why, who's responsible for this? So the thing with that, it gets in dangerously into ideas of blame and other kinds of things where the responsibility is actually offloaded from the person in those early days in a very dangerous way. So we want people to own their behavior, own their responsibility. And frankly, just from a therapeutic process point of view, the first important question is not why. We know just from behavior change and all kinds of theories of behavior change, the first step in any kind of behavior change is changing the behavior. And then you can figure out kind of what happened after that. So that's the logic of, and even again, I'm kind of quoting platitudes, I guess, and slogans tonight, but that whole thing of like act as if, right? I can pretend I'm doing this as if it feels natural, and eventually it will. And I think that's the basic lesson here, is that we oftentimes just need to do the work and trust that the whys, including that unfolding story, and by all of us, of course, are interested in that. That's what I want to know, why this is, what made this go. But that answer to those whys is not going to necessarily help me change the behavior. And that's, people have a hard time understanding that. The why is not going to be fuel to motivate behavior change. It's going to be interesting, and I'm curious about that, but that's not the essential piece that I need. What I need is just to learn how to do new behaviors. There's even there's a whole field of cognitive behavioral therapy called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And all it is, dialectical behavior doesn't look at history, doesn't look at your past, doesn't look at any kind of psychodynamic stuff. What it does look at is just, okay, what are the skills that I need to stay sober or to have a healthy relationship or whatever? It's DBT is not just about addiction. But so it looks at, okay, what does it look like if I have empathy? What are the steps in terms of my behavior that would do that? And it's very possible to teach people how to do those steps before they really understand why they don't have empathy in the first place. And so I think to really look at those skills and the skill development and trust that the deeper knowledge will kind of fill in once you start doing it. And with time, frankly. All those answers don't come immediately. So I think just that, so I guess that's a very long way of answering that question. Just saying, yeah, the whys, I get it. I totally get it, because that's where I want to go too. But I know that's not the most important thing early on in recovery. The most important thing is just learn new skills and start to practice them. And then until you get better and better at them.
Yeah, what I was told was, who cares why you're an addict? You're an addict. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
We'll deal with why
that's a
later.
that's a
We'll
much
deal with
shorter, more
why
concise way.
later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Let's
what I
get
was
you
saying in
sober.
15 minutes.
Yeah,
exactly. Perfect.
yeah, no, and I popped a link into the chat feature for our online work groups. We have work groups for sex addicts and for porn addicts. In the first level, in both courses, we don't look at why. We look at what the problem is and how to deal with it. And the second and sex addiction as a third level, we start looking at the why a little bit, because it does eventually need to be uncovered and dealt with for long-term sobriety. But early recovery, it's all about what David was just talking about, just some basic skills to get through the day without acting out. In our treatment center, we do uncover like early life trauma and things like that, the why, but we kind of back burner it and send it home in the aftercare plan to be dealt with in individual therapy when the client is ready. You know, once you get some sobriety under your belt, then you're ready to do this painful trauma work, and it is painful.
Right.
So yeah.
And it's not unusual, by the way. And again, well-meaning therapists really want to dig into that trauma or the early life experience too soon. And remember, our addiction is how we cope with stuff. And if my primary coping mechanism is my addiction and you take it away, I'm kind of floundering for tools to manage feelings for a while. And so if I have a therapist that sends me into, the dark corners of my childhood too soon, it's going to be really problematic for me. So I think timing for trauma work is a little bit down the road from early recovery.
And this could also go back to our first question, where they went to a couples therapist who wasn't a CSAT. Probably we're not dealing with the right issues. And even couples, right, exactly. You and I have talked about this. Usually we need to get the addict sober and get the betrayed partner at least stabilized, because they come into this in crisis, they're in trauma. So get both people stabilized and then start doing some couples counseling. There's a time and a place where it's too soon for couples counseling, and it can actually be counterproductive.
I totally agree. The one exception I see sometimes is that if a couple is so needing good communication skills, sometimes a couple sessions with a couples counselor early on can teach them like how to talk, how to check in, even how to argue in a healthy way, right? So those skills can be sometimes useful, but otherwise, I agree. I think both people really need to be focusing on themselves in the first couple months of recovery, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna jump to the chat feature again. I'm trying to take these in the order they came in, so I'm bouncing back and forth. Please use the Q&A feature. Easier for me. Chat feature's fine. My sex addict husband immediately went into drug rehab when his acting out with transgenders was exposed. He is now on a variety of pharmaceutical drugs for ADHD, bipolar, depression, and anxiety. We can address that a little bit too. He's denying his acting out to friends and family, and he's gaslighting me with regard to his acting out. Do the prescription drugs inhibit his real recovery and being honest with himself and others? Could he have possibly forgotten the things he's done because he was high when he did them? All yours, David. This is David's specialty.
There's a lot in there. Okay, first of all, let me just talk about straight identified men and transgender individuals. This is a growing trend right now, and it's something we see a lot. And I think there's a lot of reasons why people do this and act out in other kinds of ways. We know that very classic with sex addiction is this escalation and tolerance, and the need to kind of do more to get the dopamine. So I think that's a lot of that. So, but it's a fairly common pattern and something that we're looking at a lot lately.
We see this with porn use. As we escalate, it's more the intensity of what we're looking at, and we uncover elements, hidden elements of an arousal template, things we didn't know would turn us on. We learn about them, and then and transgender is one of the most common ones, I think, that I run across. I think, David, you would agree.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
So that behavior we do see, and often, by the way, I see with chemsex users. So people that are sexual, acting out sexually, and who are also using typically amphetamines, which are very disinhibiting, right? And so that behavior, if there's any kind of urge for it, it starts to be expressed. So that's the behavior I just wanted to say at the beginning. You mentioned he's now on a variety of pharmaceutical drugs for ADHD, bipolar depression, anxiety. So I'm a little concerned here. First of all, there's a lot of reasons that those would all be good choices for somebody. I don't know if this is all newly diagnosed, and let me just do my little sermonette on making these major diagnoses when in early recovery, because I know, especially, and I'm assuming here that the drugs involved are probably amphetamines based on the behavior, but anytime we have drugs on board, it can look really much more emotionally scary from a mental health point of view. If we just wait a few weeks, most of those symptoms go away. So for example, with a lot of the amphetamines, at the levels people use them with sex and porn addiction, there's a lot of psychosis. There's a lot of psychotic stuff. There's a lot of paranoia. And so people can, that's really scary stuff. And if a therapist, again, not really understanding addiction, sees that, they're going to go, well, this person has schizophrenia, or this person's bipolar, or whatever. And by the way, any addict looks like they have ADHD when they're acting out. So all those things I kind of am very cautious about diagnosing, or certainly I'm not a prescriber, but referring somebody to a psychiatrist to get medicated for. So I don't know the circumstances here, and then that all may be totally appropriate. But when you have that many different kinds of medications on board, and it's kind of almost like throwing just whatever sticks, right? If we throw it all at the wall, because you have all the major diagnoses in there.
And
I
some
worry.
of these, like ADHD meds and bipolar meds, they're contraindicated. I mean, they're going to fight each other and react badly with each other. I mean, I don't know anybody who's on both of those, or that's bad news.
And so when we're on those kind of medications, even prescribed, it does interfere with our ability to kind of, first of all, think clearly, at least until we get regulated with them, and also to make contact with our emotional lives. And so I think he may be kind of spinning a little bit with all these, with feeling kind of weird physically and emotionally, and then continuing these old behaviors. Again, not to excuse, but I think his recovery efforts are probably being complicated to probably a pretty significant degree by all these other things going on with other medications. So if he has, I don't know who's prescribed them, I would recommend, if you were my client, I'd try to get him into a psychiatrist that understands addiction and can really kind of maybe go through these meds and at least make a consultation about, okay, this one probably should go, this one might be useful, whatever, because that's a lot of stuff being loaded up. So all that said, I think when we do see these chemsex addicts, which is using drugs and acting out sexually, we really have to address the the drug use clearly, but we have to address both behaviors simultaneously. And it's true, a good therapist needs to see, okay, is this sexual acting out the result of bipolar disorder, which can also result in a lot of kind of manic, compulsive sex, but it's not sex addiction per se. So that's, any responsible therapist is going to kind of weave through that differential diagnosis. But I'm a little concerned that they're trying everything here, and it's actually going to be counterproductive for your husband.
Do the drugs inhibit real recovery and being honest?
Yes and no. Yeah, so the prescription drugs, some of them, if somebody is truly ADHD, where they can't really focus, they get lost in their thoughts, they get easily distracted, then an ADHD drug can be useful. If somebody has true anxiety disorder that's crippling, then an anxiety medication can be useful. I don't recommend a benzodiazepine, which is highly addictive, but there's others that work. So when they're properly prescribed, these drugs are useful and in some cases essential. But the problem is, though, that every drug, and we think of them as, because we toss them around so much, these names, and so many people are on them, they're not benign, right? Every drug has some kind of side effect. And so what we know from a lot of these drugs, they do inhibit a person's ability to connect to feelings at least a deeper level. And so that is a factor. And I remember we had a client once who came in, and he came in on a high dose of amphetamines, and we actually detoxed him over a period of 3 or 4 weeks from these amphetamines. And with every day almost, but certainly with every week, you could see him start to connect deeper and deeper at a feeling level. He was starting to connect those emotions. And at first he verbalized them, but boy, as he got some distance between him and the amphetamines, you could really see how the depth of the feeling starting to kind of come alive. It was like going from black and white to color. It was really profound to me. And so there's such a great example of how these drugs, yes, they do impact how we think. And that's why we have to really be conservative about them. If you need them, you need them, right? If you're bipolar and you need your meds, that's fine. But I think sometimes we just over medicate people in an effort to control the behavior.
And the last bit of this, he says he doesn't remember some of the acting out behaviors because could he have possibly forgotten the things he did in terms of sexual acting out because he was high? And maybe answer that if the high is amphetamines, and then answer it if the high is like alcohol, if he's really drunk.
Right. So, I mean, usually when we see sex and drugs combined, it is amphetamines, right? Speed. And normally people don't have blackouts per se. They remember pretty much, it may be kind of hazy. They may lose track of what came when or where they were, but generally I don't generally hear long stories about sexual acting out of which there's no memory. Now, there's other drugs too. There's drugs like gamma hydroxybutyrate, GHB, which often goes with meth, which is out there very common these days. It's a very close cousin of rohypnol. Yeah, people are going to black out. People are going to be sexually assaulted on rohypnol and GHB as well. So other things. And then alcohol, as Scott mentioned, yeah, people are going to black out on alcohol a lot more than they do on amphetamines. But in my experience, people use the alcohol in lower doses to disinhibit. But when they're sex addicts and porn addicts, they're out there doing, and they use the alcohol in lower doses to get there. So yeah. Is there a possibility of blackout? Yeah, but I'd really want to drill down into that one.
Yeah, I agree. Not likely. If I was acting out, if I had escalated to trans, I think I would remember no matter what drugs I was doing. I would know that I was doing that. I may not remember all the details, but I would know that it.
Exactly.
Okay. Good evening. I'm a recovering addict and sponsor. Good. My sponsee has a therapist, but it's not a CSAT. I've had numerous conversations about how a specialist, a CSAT is a better way to go, but he seems happy with his therapist. The problem is that now he's telling me that his therapist is talking about codependency, whereas I follow Dr. Rob's Prodependency program. Is there any advice on how to handle this situation? Thank you both for your service. So maybe a little differentiation between codependence and prodependence. And but there's about 6 questions packed into this one too.
Yeah, Scott, do you want to lay out the difference to start with? Sure, and then I'll talk.
Sure. Codependency basically is usually applied to betrayed partners. And it's basically a way of pathologizing them and blaming and shaming them for being in a relationship with an addict. It's like if you were married to her, you'd drink too, kind of a thing. It's almost that. It's that level of blaming and shaming. It basically says your childhood trauma is the reason you're in a relationship with an addict. And you're so glomming onto them, you're addicted to them. And now it sounds like this is being applied to the addict in this case, like you're addicted to people and you drink and use and act out because you're so addicted to people, that you need to numb with substances or sex. That's probably where that's going. Prodependence is just a different way of looking at relationships. Codependency is a trauma-based theory. It says you have trauma, you need to deal with your trauma or nothing will change. Prodependence says it's okay to love somebody with problems. It's okay to love another person. You can't love another person too much. You might be a little overly enmeshed. Let's talk about some healthy boundaries. The work of codependence and prodependence, setting healthy boundaries, engaging in self-care is the same, but codependence is really blaming and shaming. Prodependence is kind of celebratory of, you want to be connected with another person. We are built to be connected with other people. Let's celebrate that. Now let's find out how to do it without creating problems, which means better boundaries, better self-care. just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. And so when we are working with somebody in a sponsor-sponsee relationship like this, it's a little slightly different, obviously, than a therapist, but I think you make the same points. And that is that I would just try to kind of educate and point out the distinction in a gentle way, perhaps give them a copy of the Prodependence book that Rob wrote, and just explain it in a non-shaming way. Because I think and I use that word intentionally, the shame word, because I think sometimes that is kind of at the core of some of the codependent, and underlies that it's a little bit of shaming and pathologizing even. But I think if we can help people see that they have some choices in terms of how to frame their perspective on these things, that's the kind of approach I would take. Instead of saying you're wrong, I would say, well, gee, here's another way of looking at that. That's maybe a gentler, kinder way, less pathologizing, and just maybe give them the book. But I think this is a problem where we have people with different perspectives, and but I do think you don't want to get in a power struggle, you don't get into control issues, but I would just point out and say, well, there's another way of looking at this. And it might be a really useful thing to talk about and lead to other kinds of conversations as well. So,
yeah. And why do you recommend a CSAT? Why do we recommend a CSAT rather than any run-of-the-mill therapist? And there are a lot of great therapists out there, but yeah.
Yeah, so, and just boy, I can't, it's probably every day. This lesson is learned by me again, because I hear about some kind of bad experience of somebody, a well-intentioned therapist who just kind of recommends the wrong thing, or just has a blunder that can set an individual or a couple back. And that is that mostly around the issues of how harmful these kind of activities are on the spouse. And there is such a thing as betrayal trauma, and some of this dynamic. And I've seen really terrible things with people kind of minimizing or not believing or excusing the addict, or just not understanding the nature of this whole thing. And so having somebody just familiar with it is so critical in this. And a CSAT is that. You know, I've been a sex therapist for almost 25 years, and a sex therapist, and there's a lot of good sex therapists out there, and I like some of the sex therapy approach, but when we become trained as sex therapists, we're not trained in any of this. So I knew nothing about how sex addiction looked. I'm an addict and a drug addict in recovery, so I kind of know addiction, but boy, the nuances of sex addiction are just not covered. And if I take some standard sex therapy approaches that are perfectly fine and best practices in that field and apply them to an active sex addiction couple, I'm going to really make some mistakes, because the concepts just don't fit or don't serve that situation very well. So that's why I went back and got a CSAT, and I think that's where this orientation of a certified sex addiction therapist comes in, because it's just so much more tailor-made to this situation that we can then work and without doing harm. And that's the bottom line of any therapist, right? We want to help and not do harm. And unfortunately, I've seen well-meaning therapists do harm by just not having the skill set that they need for this particular situation.
Yeah, I teach our porn addiction 6-week work groups online, and so many of the guys come in and they've been to a sex therapist. I shouldn't even do that. Sex therapists are very good at what they do, but they don't know sex addiction. And the therapist was basically trying to tell them the problem isn't with the compulsivity relating to porn. The problem is with their attitude toward porn. If they just lighten up a little bit and think sex positive thoughts, their problem with porn will go away. So then they do that, and what happens is they start using even more porn, and their addiction escalates, and things get worse. The consequences get worse. The shame gets worse. All of it just gets worse. And this is when a well-meaning therapist can actually do damage, because they're not the right therapist. I love people like David, who are both sex therapists and CSATs, because some people,
as is Rob, by the way, we both are.
As is Rob, and yeah. I think Karen is also. I don't know if she, but some people actually need this sex positive approach. That's what they need, that more than addiction treatment. And if we get somebody in, we'll say, we're not the right person for you. You need to go see a sexologist. who can help you work through the deep shame that you have around sex. I mean, you're looking at porn once a month, and your religion tells you it's a sin, and that you're a porn addict because you're looking at it once a month. And that, once a month does not a porn addict make, usually. So yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling. This is from this is in relation to our question about Covenantize earlier. This individual says he uses it right out of the box. It works that he can watch all of the SRH content on the website and on YouTube. So possibly the settings were ratcheted up a notch on the person who asked the question earlier. So maybe it's cutting things off that aren't cut off for you. But you can customize Covenantize and NetNanny and all of the others to higher or lower levels of filtering. And we do recommend those, by the way. They will not prevent you from acting out, but they're definitely a bump in the road. They will slow you down. So we recommend them. Anything to add to that, David?
Yeah, no, really, that's the whole point. I mean, I think I've had addicts sometimes in the past who would sort of take this like as a personal challenge. Well, I can beat that. Well, yeah, you probably can, if you try it, but it's not to keep you locked up in a penitentiary. It's to slow you down and to be another tool once we get that impulse, between that impulse and the acting out, and just however many barriers you can throw up there, the better. That's what that is.
Yeah, the more time I have to think rational thoughts before I act out, the better off I am. The less likely I am to actually get to acting out. So lots of people use Covenantize. I prefer NetNanny, but I think I know more people who use Covenantize than any of the others. All right. My spouse has recently left the 35-year heterosexual marriage after 3 years of recovery from a 12-year sex addiction. He said he is ready to live his authentic self, and he has moved back to a town in which he acted out daily for 3 years. He is in contact with at least one ex-sex partner, scheduled to go on a mushroom trip on PrEP. Maybe David, you can explain what PrEP is, Viagra, and dating sites. Is this part of the coming out process, or is his sex addiction guiding his path? There's a lot packed into this. We got about 6 questions in every questions today.
Yeah, seriously, it's multi-part. We do occasionally see people who have, and certainly usually of a certain age, right? When it was harder to maybe come out as gay 30 or 40 years ago. I'm of that era myself, and I have a lot of friends who married women, had kids, did the right thing, stayed together, and then now the kids are leaving the home, and they're kind of evaluating, gee, is this how I want to spend the rest of my life, or should I really be true to myself? That's what the words I hear a lot. And so people kind of go through this process sometimes. That does happen, right? And without any kind of addiction involved at all. When I hear this scenario and I overlay addiction on top of it and recovery, I start to worry. And it may very well be that your husband is going through this self-discovery process. And I have no doubt he probably is. The problem is the process here itself, right? When I see things like mushroom trips, PrEP, which I'll describe in a moment, Viagra, dating sites, and by that I'm sure I'm thinking like apps like Grindr, Scruff, or whatever. These are like fast lane in the inner circle, right? This is all slippery slope stuff that's really could almost be considered bottom line behavior sometimes. So I'm very, very concerned when I hear that constellation of patterns going on. Just as a footnote, PrEP, for those of you that don't know, PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. And what that is, it's an anti-HIV. They've taken an HIV medication. And we know from a lot of research now for 10 years, 15 years, that if you take these a combination of pills on a daily basis, or even now less frequently, if you're exposed to HIV, you don't seroconvert, you don't get it. And that's an incredibly important milestone. And I do recommend that if somebody is sexually active in a way where they're meeting a lot of strangers for sex, then PrEP is probably a good thing. But when I see PrEP as part of the menu of options for a recovering sex addict, I worry a lot, because that's basically inconsistent in my mind with somebody. Now, I have had clients, single guys who were trying to rediscover some kind of healthy relationships and sex life and starting the dating scene, and they were on PrEP, and that's appropriate. I think though, with a newly, well, 3 years, but still in recovery, somebody in recovery going on PrEP, on mushrooms, on all these things, this is a bad sign to me. And so I can't really say anything more than that, except I do worry for this person. And I have no doubt the questioning of orientation, sexual orientation is no doubt legitimate. All that's fine. I see that all the time. But boy, all these, the way we're doing it is a bad process here. And I worry for this person a lot.
Yeah. Gay men who are sex addicts typically do not have safe sex. And they typically need Viagra because they're often doing drugs at the same time, which impacts the ability to perform. They typically, the term dating sites is just such a misnomer these days. It's right. Hookup apps, they're sex apps. You might as well be having anonymous sex in the bushes for all the information you get about the other person. And then he's planning to explore with mushrooms, and you're saying he acted out daily for 3 years. He probably was on Grindr and other apps acting out daily for 3 years, and he was probably taking Viagra, and he might have been on PrEP, but he was probably playing around with drugs. So I'm with David. This doesn't sound like a guy who's coming out. This sounds like a guy who's heading right back to active sex addiction, which is a little frightening. I live in Palm Springs, California, which is a gay, actually I don't live in Palm Springs, I live in Cathedral City, but Palm Springs is kind of a gay vacation town, and a lot of gay men retire here. David lives near Miami, not in Miami, same thing there. And he probably sees a lot of what I see, which is guys who, after 35 years of marriage, get divorced or retire, and they move to one of these gay meccas, and they get on the apps, sugar, silver daddies or Grindr or whatever they are, and they go nuts. And then they're doing meth, and a year later they're dead, or they've gone through all their money, or they've seroconverted, or just I see so many bad things happen. And then the guys come into recovery, and I'm so scared for your ex-husband that this is going to happen.
This is serious enough to me. This is a residential treatment case, in my opinion, a seeking integrity case. A lot of serious things here going on.
Yeah, and the comment is that she worries a lot too. Yeah,
of course you do.
I want to commend you on, as hurt as you must be feeling from this, it's clear that you still care about him and want him to have a happy, healthy life. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I just want to acknowledge that. He went to, he needs to come back. So
I agree with Scott. And I also, to the writer of the question, I hope you're getting support for you too.
Yes.
Because this has got to be a very stressful process to watch and witness. So yeah, make sure you get your support. It's going to be really important.
So David, when somebody goes through this now, I mean, this is more common than most people probably realize, this kind of situation. What is a healthier coming out process for an individual, 60 years old, Yeah, and
there's, by the way, there's no wrong time to come out, right? Good, if somebody has been in touch with these feelings all their life, but really never acted on them, and here is, this point in their life, they can do it, fine. I think there's different models of how people come out, but generally the process is kind of looking around, seeing that I'm not the only one, seeing that there are other people like me out there that have common and steps that they've gone through developmentally in the emotional development in this process, and to start to explore in safe ways. The problem is that when we kind of are still uncomfortable about the behavior, so we have to take something to disinhibit ourselves or to get through our anxiety. And so that's why we see people starting to combine different drugs, different risky behaviors in order to kind of fuel what they want to do. So that drug use for disinhibition is a really big factor here. But so I think just doing it in a healthy way, doing it with support, it's of course it's a big change. So you need to talk about it. I find finding some kind of non-addictive related context where you can be socially connected. And like you and I are both fortunate, Scott, to live in towns where there's gay softball leagues and there's gay choirs and there's gay political groups and there's gay everything where you can affiliate with other people and start to make friends in that world without having to go to a bar and get drunk or go to somebody's house and use meth. Yeah, exactly. So
whatever.
Finding healthy ways where you can like start to express that part of you without having to go off the deep end of some kind of addictive behavior.
Yeah, and by the way, this goes for straight people too. If you're suddenly newly single and you're like, how am I supposed to meet people? I have to go on the apps. No, you don't. Go to the soup kitchen and volunteer. Be of service and meet somebody nice who's also of service.
Exactly.
Join a team. Go to a support group. If you're comfortable in a church setting, find a church that's gay friendly if you're gay, or whatever, or find some place that doesn't involve addictive behaviors. AA has a saying: if you hang out at the bar, you're going to get drunk. You go to the barbershop every day, eventually you're going to get a haircut. So if I'm on Grindr every day, eventually I'm going to act out.
And I had to do a chemsex work group on Tuesday nights, and we have guys there from like Montana and India, other countries where you don't walk out and find a lot of gay people, and they're making do. They're figuring out how to do it online. They're connecting. They're driving 3 hours once a week or something. They're finding it. So you can those other alternative ways are out there for sure.
Yeah, we're out of time. We're also out of questions. We timed it perfectly for
all right.
So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for your great questions. That was a really great discussion. David, I know you're exhausted when you on the days where he takes the red eye back from LA. So thank you for being here and for your time, and we will see you next week.
All right, Scott. Thanks so much. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.